as you saw in my previous presentation, or I hope you saw it anyway, I have a very deep passion for children. So how did I end up here? It's a very good question I get all the time. Actually, COVID is how I ended up here. As you might imagine, during COVID, I ran into some issues with being able to work with children in a one-on-one setting, and I struggled with how I'm going to get that on a virtual platform. So I was praying to God, just use me in any way that you need me to during this season, and we'll figure it out when this all mellows out. And I was reached out to by a hospice center in Hawaii, and after working with them for about a month, my supervisor, as a volunteer, my supervisor came to me and said, you know what you'd be really good at? And so I gave this a shot, and I love doing this. I consider it kind of a hobby, but I love working with people, and I think there's a huge need for this, and I think it's a ministry that's fairly easy for our church and organization to fall into. Actually, I did want to mention, because it was brought up to me that not everybody knows what a doula is. A doula is, I guess, the synonym for it would be midwife, right? So midwives are used to bring children into the world, and they're often referred to also as doulas or birth doulas. A death doula does the same thing. We just help transition you into the next life. So we move you from where you're at to God. Why would I use a death doula? So death doulas primarily work with hospice centers. They're looking at working with people who are at the very end of their lives, who know that they're about to transition into the next life. Death doulas do a lot of work, not just with the individual who is transitioning, but with their family as well. And anybody can become a death doula. There's no prerequisite. You don't need to be an RN, although a lot of RNs are also death doulas. You don't need to have any kind of experience in the medical field, although it is extremely helpful. But anybody can become a death doula. You just have to have a heart for it and be willing to volunteer. Like I said, everybody benefits from a death doula, and I'll get into why throughout these slides, what the benefits of a death doula are, because we do have a little bit more freedom than medical professionals do, just because, again, we're not boggled down with other work or a million patients who might be assigned 5 people for a year, whereas a nurse practitioner might have they might have a dozen patients a day. Some of them are very busy. But we're just given a handful, and we work with them. So one of the things we work on are legacy projects. And this is really actually a lot of fun, and it's pretty cool. It's different for everybody. It's a little piece of yourself you leave behind for the people that you left. I'll go through a couple of them that I've worked on. One gentleman, as he was transitioning, he was writing little notes, sticky notes, to his daughter, just like little phrases or advice, nothing real long. He crumpled up into a little ball and he stuck it in a mason jar. He wrote 365 of those before he transitioned into the next life. And now his daughter has a mason jar full of his father's thoughts. For the next year, every day she can open up one, and her dad is right there with her. Legacy projects are huge, and they're so important, not just to the family, but to the loved one. Another lady, individual, she played the piano. She loved playing the piano. I recorded her playing a couple of her favorite songs, and then I helped her by taking that recording and I put it into a bunch of CDs, and then at her funeral she handed these out to everybody so that they would have a piece of her to take home. Like I said, legacy. I have a legacy project I work on, sort of on accident. I didn't realize that's what it was when I did it. I've had a lot of aunts and uncles pass away before their children became adults, and so when I became a mom, I started writing letters to my kids on their birthdays. Just what they did that year, what I was proud of, because if I went or if I go before they're old enough to understand how much I love them, I want them to have that piece of me. But I didn't realize at the time that that is also a legacy project. You can start it now. But yeah, so I work a lot with legacy projects. That's a huge, huge one. Another thing we do is we help them with making a plan. Making a plan for your funeral. So you don't think this would be a big deal, right? You're like, oh, I don't care what you do with me. I'll be gone. I'll be in another place. It is a huge deal. Maybe not to you, but to your family. And this is the cornerstone of a lot of family turmoil after you transition. One person over here says, no, Dad would have wanted to be cremated. No, Dad didn't want to be cremated. Dad wanted to be buried. Oh, did he want to be buried in a coliseum or in the ground? I mean, these seem like really trivial things, but to a family that just lost you, this is a dividing factor. You need to plan it all out. Make sure they know exactly what you want, have it in writing. I always encourage my families to sit down with their loved one in the room if they're capable at a table and just talk it out. These are the things that I definitely want. And, you know, I also encourage them to leave someone in charge. This is also a thing that a lot of people don't do. Have somebody there who is in charge of making those final decisions. Because once you've appointed that person, whether it's the oldest son or your cousin or whatever, once you appoint that person, whatever they say will go, and there's a lot less friction after the transition. But this is what we help do. We help make these plans. I have a sheet of paper with a checklist, different types of coffins you can get. Actually, since I'm on it, one of the coolest funerals that I was a part of, the family was very poor. They did not have a lot of money. And I learned about something called cardboard coffins. And so what the family did was they got a cardboard coffin, and that's exactly what you would think it is. It's a coffin that is made out of cardboard. And they decorated it with pictures of their loved one and memories that they had. I mean, from the youngest age, there was a little 3-year-old girl sitting there drawing a picture of her holding her grandpa's hand. Like that's what this is, you know. And that was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. The whole family got involved. And he was buried in that coffin. There's no rule that says you have to spend $5,000 on a wooden box. So just making a plan is one of the things that we've done. Family mitigation. So I kind of went into this a little bit. There will be stress. Transitioning is a stressor for everybody. I would say I've had arguments with where families were arguing over what kind of fruit salad to have at the funeral. It doesn't seem like a big deal sitting here, listening to me talk, but to this family that just lost somebody, and honestly, 9 times out of 10, the issue that they're talking about is not actually what's wrong. It's just what they focused on. But when I do this for families, I'll pick out the 2 people that have the loudest voice, that seem to be the ones that are separating the group, and I'll have them sit down with me, and we'll sit down and we'll talk it through. And this is one of the things that Death Doula does. Respite care. This is one of the simplest things that I do. And literally, I just sit there with the person that is transitioning. And it allows the family to go pick up their medication, to take a nap, to go to the grocery store, go on a hike, self-care, respite care. You just sit in for the family so that they have a minute to themselves. And a lot of the time I get, oh, well, I feel guilty. And I'm like, you're going to feel more guilty if you're not taking care of yourself. Because if you're not taking, as I've said before, if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not taking care of your loved one. So respite care is something that we definitely provide. I know the nurses, the RNs, they really love this because it's just free care for them. But we sit there and we hold their hand. Sometimes you'll talk to them. You'll listen to their stories. I like to say, what's your favorite place you've ever visited? That's my favorite, because as soon as you get someone talking about their life, you're going to learn so many cool things. You won't always work with people that have families either, and that's the other thing. So sometimes respite care is providing just company for that person because they don't have a family, or their family's not anywhere near where they live. This is very common in Hawaii. You get a lot of retired people out there. Their families live in the United States, Europe, and they don't have someone to sit and listen to their stories. And it's just being there. I mean, really, that's what a death doula is. It's just being present. those I've sat and done rosary. There was one woman I went to her house every week at the same time, and we sat down and we did rosary, and then we had tea, and that was ceremonial care for her. You know, it's just being there and doing what they want. I've done room cleansings, just whatever their request is. If I don't feel comfortable doing it, I'll find somebody in their faith group that is. Right? So if it's something that I'm not necessarily equipped to do, or if I don't necessarily believe in it, I'm not there to change their faith. I'm not there to recruit them to Christianity. I'm there to make them comfortable and to help them transition in the way that they want to. Event planning, one of the cooler things that has been done, we did a funeral before the transition. So a gentleman wanted to hear his eulogies. He wanted to be there for the whole thing. So we had the whole funeral, and he sat in where the coffin would normally sit in the center aisle, and he listened to his funeral. He was present for it. And then for his actual funeral, after he transitioned, it was just a ceremony on the grass. A few people said a few extra words if they wanted to, and then he was buried. And it was very quick, but he wanted to be there for his funeral, so we planned his funeral. This is probably the coolest thing I've ever been a part of, washing the body after death. A lot of people, I recommend this to people. It helps with closure. It helps with just the experience of knowing that your loved one transitioned. A lot of people are very standoffish, particularly in our society, but this is very common in other societies and other cultures. Japan comes to mind. But once they start, they realize how spiritual this process actually is. And you bring some incense and oils, and right after the transition, you know, you undress the individual, and then you just wash them down, you lay a blanket over them, and then and then they come and they take the body to the funeral home. But this happens in the house. It happens with only the family present, and 9 times out of 10, I'll start the process with the family member, and then I'll step back, and I will let them take over. And it is completely for them. And then I'm just there for moral support or emotional support as needed. But this is one of the more beautiful things that I've seen as a death doula. So understanding the signs of death and 11th hour care. This is a big part of being a death doula. It is understanding that you are on call, because this individual knows that they have, for lack of a better term, an expiration. So 11th hour care is understanding what those signs are, explaining them to the family, and when you get that call, showing up. They could be the middle of the night, the middle of the day, but this is the moment you're there for. For some people, it'll be the nurse that calls you because no one else is there. For some people, it'll be the family member. They'll call, and you'll be there, and you'll set up. So for some people, it's been as simple as just walking in the room, making sure that there's no extensive drama, that it's a peaceful situation. For other people, I have to bring a whole kit with me because they wanted, water, the sound of water running in the background, and they want incense, and they want essential oil smells, and they want, they have a whole vision of what they want their transition to look like, and your job in the 11th hour is to provide that. Because the family doesn't need to be concentrating on that. They can't necessarily concentrate on that. So as a death doula, your job is to provide that and give the family the peace of mind that it will be provided to their special occasions. So I wanted to take a moment. I don't know if you guys have heard this phrase called talk story. So you tell a story about death or dying, and not even necessarily for some, it's talking about the culture. Talking story is just literally telling a story. And I want to tell a story of 2 different deaths that I experienced. The first one was my own grandfather. He passed away in early 2020. He was the first grandparent that I lost. And he was the hardest hit for me. My grandfather was a wonderful man. We used to sit and talk about politics and the future. He loved to swim and he loved his beer. Genesee Pale Ale was his beer of choice. He was a wonderful person and he gave the best hugs. I gave him his last rites. The priest, we couldn't get a hold of them, we couldn't get them to come in. That was the hardest thing I've ever done. My grandfather's one wish was that he would not die alone. My grandfather died alone. He was moved to hospice care. I went out there, he had been in the hospital. My dad called me, he said, if you're going to say goodbye, you need to come now. I hopped on a plane within hours. Told my husband hysterical. He said, don't worry about it, we'll figure it out, get on the plane. So I got on the plane. I was there within hours. I stayed for 2 weeks with him in the hospital. During that time, they said it's not going to be long. And again, we couldn't get him to the priest. We gave him his last rites. He looked like he was improving. This was before I really was experienced as a deaf doula. I didn't know the signs. I do now. I recognize them. I remember them in him, but I didn't understand then. He looked like he was improving. They were talking about sending him to a rehabilitation center. So I went home and I hopped a plane. 12 hours later, I get a call from my dad. He died in his sleep at the hospice center. Nobody was there. That was really hard for me. After that, I embraced doula work. After that, this became very important because dying is often rushed in our society. We go into the hospital, we stay there, and then one day we're gone. This gives an alternative. You can die in your home, with your family, with your loved ones. If you know what's coming, why? I mean, you can go to the hospital, but for myself, I want to be in the presence of God, and I want to be in the presence of family. I couldn't give that to my grandpa, but I can give that to other people. Second story. My grandmother died 6 months later. Not his spouse on the other side of my family. And her death was beautiful. She died in her home. Her daughters were around her. Her husband was with her. They were holding hands. My mom, I wasn't there. It was in the height of COVID. So only essential family members were there. But she died in her own bed. And my mom said that it was like she smiled, she looked out the window, and it was peaceful. And I have seen that with other people. And I am sad that I didn't get to be there for my grandmother, but I am glad somebody was. And that's the death that I want to give to people. And that's why I embrace this. It's outside of my professional realm. It's not something I ever thought I would do. But I embrace this path because I've seen both stories. And everybody should have the second. And that concludes my presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
I just went through this experience, so I appreciate some thoughts on it. Is that, since we are clergy and we have family members that pass away, it gets a little wonky.
Yeah.
Like which role am I in? I've done medicine for a long period of time, so I kind of know how to detach, but it's kind of, but that's different. I mean, it's, well, it is and it isn't, but I'm very schooled in that pull back part. So all the things that happen with families that you talked about, the disagreements, who's the lineup, this is one thing I went through, who's the lineup for who gets to read, which has all these other family issues below it, like, you know, who's the chosen child and who's the left out child. I'm just trying to fill the blanks in, who's reading what, because somebody should else have been doing this, but they went, well, you're clergy, so you know how to do it. And then I want you to do the last rites. No, I think you should call the priest. No, you do it. I think you should call the priest. No, you do it. And then by this time we're too late, so I'm doing it. And then it's, I mean, I'm trying to, you know, at the end of it, I really could write a whole Saturday Night Live skit on this. But, so it's the kind of that, you know, different roles. And then I have my own stuff. And then I'm also supposed to be pastor to them because they don't really want to call the priest to talk about it. And then why haven't I called these 3 or 4 cousins to give them spiritual guidance? You know. So that's just kind of, and there's more, I don't want to keep going on, but as men, so how do we manage that?
So now what I do, and I think this dove out of the experience with my grandfather and giving him the last rites and how difficult that was for me. Now I separate myself from it just by being very assertive about it. Like, I too am grieving. This is my loved one also. I know that you want me to step in. I know you probably feel more comfortable with me stepping in, but I don't know that I am emotionally or mentally capable of doing the best that I could do in this situation. And really, you just have to be very assertive at the end of the day. And I know that's not what people want to hear, but because it's difficult to be assertive with, say, your mom, or your dad, or your sisters, you know. But that's really what it comes down to, is just being very assertive that I'm not here to do my job, I'm here to grieve the loss of this person. And that's really what it comes down to.
I don't know if I told you this, I did my father's memorial service for a couple of reasons. One, he asked me a few years back, something happens to me, can you do my service? And I said, if I'm able to, I'll do it. And I kind of took that role, so I made all of the funeral arrangements. Of course, the only other person I consulted was my mother. You know, I had to get mother's blessing on everything, but basically I handled everything so she didn't have to stress about it. I put together the service, I made sure she was happy with it, she picked out the music. So that was kind of how we did it. But for me, it was like a great honor. It was a great honor because he was such a good person that I didn't have to fake it. I didn't have to say, and make everything. He was a wonderful person. And everyone he encountered, he touched so many lives. And even with COVID and everything that was going on, and it was during a weekday on top of it, we had a really big turnout. And getting to see all of those people come in, you know, just really strengthened me. I felt like he was there. I felt like I had a lot of spiritual help from the other side to go through it. But it ended up being a blessing to me because it was the way that I could honor my father and a way to show appreciation to how much his life impacted mine. And so for me, it was not a bitter thing. It was not a sad thing. It was a celebration. It was my way of repaying him for all his years of love and support. So for me, it was a very different experience because it was the last thing I could do for him. And maybe not everybody else has that experience. But I saw the design and things, how his life came to an end, and that it was just his time. And I think maybe if he had been a young man and that had happened, or if he had not suffered as much as he had in the last few years, maybe I wouldn't have felt like it was such a blessing that he went very easy like he did, you know. So, but I guess every situation is different. You know? My situation may not be somebody else's. You know?
I think that's a beautiful way to look at it, for sure.
May I tell a mission story?
Absolutely.
It's 4 o'clock in the morning. The chaplain of our clinic calls me up. He's a deacon. He says, my cousin has been shot on the street such and such. He was working as a guard. And what do? Is go to the family right away. Well, it's an estranged part of the family. I don't know much about it. So go to him anyway. And so he went, and in Bolivia, the law is you have to bury within 24 hours. Okay, because there's no embalming and stuff. But when someone dies a violent death, it goes to the general hospital that has supposedly storage, and they have to do an autopsy. And so he went, was ministering to the family, and they wouldn't release the body. The body finally was released 3rd day. And he said, come out, I need your help to do the funeral. So we went, and this is on the outskirts of the city, one of the poorest part of the city. The family is a very poor family. And the casket is sitting out in the yard, and they don't even they have maybe one room to live in. It's got a little bit of a covering, and it's open to the streets, the dirt streets out there. Almost had to have four-wheel drive to get there. And I get there, and I'm in the health profession too, and the smell. The body had decayed very badly. But we had a funeral. The Lord was there. We were able to speak about the comfort of the Holy Spirit and so forth. So, as is the tradition, the funeral car is quite to a taxi. So they put the coffin in the taxi, and I sit in front of the taxi. And as the priest, when you go before the family. And as we're going, liquids start flowing out, going across things. We finally get to the cemetery, which is about 2 kilometers away. And they take the coffin out, they put it on the side of the road. It was dug out, everything was ready. So we had to wait there about 30 minutes, almost an hour, for them to finally get the ropes and get them there, did the last blessings and finish that. And that had taken almost all day, because that's just the way it is. In Latin America, time isn't like it is here, but it's more Kairos time, it's more live in the experience, and you have to be there to do it. So I go back to the city where it's nice and comfortable, we have an air-conditioned apartment. And Guido calls and he says, they want to do a novenario. What is novenario in English? It's 9 days of, usually nuns will come and pray the rosary 9 nights and 9 weeks in a row.
Es una novena.
They charge a good amount of
Es una novena.
money, 250 bolivianos.
Son 9 días.
And he says, okay, I said, I've never, Guido says, I've never done it, they want me to do it. I said, okay, do this. This was kind of an inspiration poem. I said, it's 9 days. There's nine fruits of the Spirit. I said, gather the family together and first have them share something good about the person who passed away. Second, share one of the fruits of the Spirit. And third, pray the Anglican Rosary. Okay? And he did that every night. And it was out in the patio, and the neighborhood was passing by, and the neighborhood would come in. And they'd never seen anything like that. And it became a neighborhood phenomenon. And at the end of the Novenari, he says, you got to come out and do the Misa of the Novenari, the final Eucharist of the Novenari. I said, okay. And I went out, and I felt very strongly about preaching on personal commitment and the decision. They've been through it, and 32 people decided that day. And so he says, what do I do? I said, start catechism. And so he began a catechism program. And the bishop, who lives in the highlands, now this is in the tropics, on the edge of the Amazon, and he finally would call him and tell him to come down. We got 32 people ready to be confirmed. And he comes down, and he has nothing but highland nice, beautiful wool garments. And it's probably 112 degrees, and his vestments come out. And he went through the worst difficulty time in ever ministry in his life, but for him the most joyous time too, because he'd never been permanently people in one place. That is the beginning of the church in Santa Cruz called Santo Tomas. And Bishop Guido moved to that part of the city. We found a place for the church, we bought the church, and he is the priest that is called for more funerals than anyone around, because he doesn't charge. Okay, our brothers in the Roman Church are very expensive. You can't get them to come for a funeral unless you're very wealthy. And so he goes and does the funerals and tells people if you want to give an offering, it's okay, but he doesn't have a fee. And he does that. COVID has made it very difficult for him to do it, and particularly because that part of the city was very, very heavily hit, and their health was totally overwhelmed because they really don't have proper care. But anyway, from death can come life, and ministry can be born from it, but it can be a pretty, at least for me, it was a very smelly experience.
Thank you for sharing. Very cool. Any other questions, comments, or stories?
But for those who don't know, Bishop Guido is the Prime Minister for Latin America. He is bilingual. He speaks Spanish and Portuguese. And so he's the leader for the communion in Latin America.
Awesome. Great.
He's the one who went through all those surgeries.
Yeah, they almost lost him last
Remarkable man. I think it helps too to have I don't know the right word, a buddy or someone you can lean on, you know? Because as much as I would like to think I could be all brave and suited up and do it, I had 2 unexpected deaths pretty much back to back, my son-in-law, my mom, and I leaned on the only person I knew, my buddy, okay? Because I was there, but I was a train wreck because you go through the whole guilt stage. I wish I would have been there. I called one more time. What if I didn't go camping? What if I didn't go to the store? What if I had been there? Could I have done something? Could I have said something to my son-in-law? You know? So I'm going through all that, and he just says, I got this. I got you. Just, you know? So that's when I go forward, and like people in my own family now are starting to talk to me, well, what about, would you be able to do this? And I said, well, again, like you said, you got to define that role and step back, like the Saturday night skit. You got to step back. I think now's a good time to call, or let's get somebody else in, because I think we deserve that grieving process as well, especially as an immediate or even, first generation removed family member.
And when Bishop Rowell says, I got you.
Sorry?
When Bishop Rowell says, I got you,
Yeah, he does.
he's got you.
Yes, he does.
I'll be there for you.
He's a dear friend.
I did want to bring up actually something you triggered my memory. It wasn't in the slideshow because I hadn't initially thought to put it in. Some people mentioned this weekend as I was bringing up what I would be talking about that one of their bigger fears is dying alone. One thing that has brought me a lot of comfort in my recent experiences is that I've never, over the 32 people that I've helped transition over the last year and a half, I have not seen a single person die alone. What I mean by that is, yes, I'm in the room, but it has done nothing but strengthen my faith in the next life. Because right before they pass, they transition, medical doctors will call it hallucinations. These are not hallucinations. These people are having full-on conversations. I see them, and right before they pass, there's a moment of peace and clarity, and you see them reaching out, whether it's visually or physically lifting their hand up. Somebody is there grabbing them and bringing them across, and it's 9 times out of 10, it's a loved one. It's somebody that passed before them. They're seeing them in that room, in that moment, and I have never seen anyone die without that happening first. So I just say take comfort in that, because I have done nothing but take comfort in that realization, that there's no questions in my mind at all.
What is that saying? The soul sees the windows of heaven or something to that effect? It's a book I read one time. Something that the clarity within split seconds of God presents something to them that just makes them absolutely overjoyed, peaceful, and then poof, they're gone.
One thing I think is always important is to realize that people, even in the last stages of the dying process, are very much aware of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a case of my great Uncle Roy. I went to see the evening, and then the next morning he passed away. And supposedly he was non-responsive, in a coma. It was my grandmother's brother, and she and my father and I were there. And we, stood there. We spoke to him, as if he could hear us, because he could. And when we got ready to leave, we were standing by the hospital door, and my grandmother said, "Goodbye, Roy." And even though he never opened his mouth, he never opened his eyes, he raised his hand like this and waved, like he was far away. And I'll never forget that.
Thank you for that.
Yes, thank you.